Flashpoint lit, too much pressure. Time to leave, need to run. In the dark of night, you said say.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Rockstar Book Club chat we're having this evening. I'm Linda, and I'm your host for tonight. And tonight we are very excited to be reviewing or discussing this particular book. It's called Backstage Pass, The Grit and the Glamour. Oh, everyone has their book. And the author is Joe Matera. So we are very excited to have Joe Matera join us this evening, all the way from Australia, where we'll be discussing his book and his career and just influence he's had and how this book has impacted his life. So I'm just going to do a little intro of Joe so that you know more about him. He is an Italian-Australian guitarist, rock journalist, and author. In addition to his current solo career, Joe has been a guitarist in the Swedish-based rock band Rough Rockers. He was also the lead guitarist of the classic rock band Double Vision. He's currently working as a solo artist, releasing solo instrumental albums and contributing guitar on various recordings around the world. In 2022, he collaborated with the British band The Corgis on an album for the Japanese market. Most recently, Joe has been working on a Queen tribute album, and he's recently revealed that he is releasing Sunset Cruise, which is an original instrumental track dedicated to one of his very favorite bands, Hank Marvin and the Shadows. So welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me on your wonderful Rockstar Club.
So what we normally do is just go around the room and we just give a little brief intro of how we got involved with reviewing this book or reading this book or what interested us about it. So what I find most interesting about Joe's book is that it's the dichotomy of a musician, a rock star, someone who's in the musical life, who's also got the double life where he's out doing interviews. He's writing a monthly column. He's interviewing producers, musicians, everyone in the rock world. He has actually interviewed over the years everyone from George Martin, who of course is referred to as the fifth Beatle, to Pink, to Brian May, to heavy metal bands. Most recently, I've seen some interviews he's done with members of the band Kiss. So he really has touched on a lot of different genres. And while this is not a traditional autobiography, I think each chapter being a vignette of all the different bands that he's met and interacted with, I think that really does give a linear progression of how it's affected his life. So he can tell us more about that. So I'm going to pass the microphone to Karen. And Karen, if you can just introduce yourself and tell us more about how you got involved.
I'm Karen John. Hi, Joe. It's nice to meet
How are you, Karen?
I completely agree with Linda. I feel like your book will appeal to everyone, really, because you have such an eclectic group of artists that there's somebody in that book that, you know, everybody would want to learn about. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad that because the idea was to sort of, I mean, my music taste is very varied. I mean, I love all styles of music and I love all sorts of different artists. And I think to be a good musician, you've got to be open to all styles of music. And plus, you know, I'm a music fan, so I appreciate music. So I'm not pedantic in the way that or purist in the way that, you know, there's only one style of music I will listen to. Music is music, you know, and if it makes you feel good or you know, whatever it does, it's great. So it doesn't matter what style. And all the artists, I mean, I've always been open to talking to different styles of musical artists because you learn from everybody, you know, and everyone's got a story. We've all got stories, you know, and it's great to sort of sometimes get out of your comfort zone and talk to people who, you know, might be the type of music you normally listen to, because you could learn something. You could go, wow, I didn't know that, and discover something about the music. So I'm glad that it appealed to you in that way too.
Cool. Mary, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Mary Dialectos.
Hi, Mary.
Nice to meet you, Joe. Thank you for joining us. I was drawn to the book because I mean, obviously I love music. We all love music. I do some choral singing, so you know, I love to sing and I love music like that. But I was wondering if you ever had the chance to, because I'm Greek, if you ever had the chance to do anything with like a bouzouki guitar which has, I guess, I don't know, different strings. It's supposed to be, I don't know if you ever used any of that kind of instrument in your music, but I just love to hear about all the different backstories of things, and that's why I was drawn to your book. And I also liked how you appreciated when the artists would let you interview them, and now you're repaying the kindness to us because you're letting us interview you. So I just thought that was really nice of you to do.
Well, that's good. Well, the first part of your question, I used to play in a ethnic band, sort of an Italian sort of wedding band. So we played all styles of music, like waltzes and marches and traditional stuff. So I may have not played those type of instruments, but the style of music. I mean, I grew up with also listening to Demis Roussos, a Greek musician. So I love that style of music. And if it's European, I'm also obviously loving that too. So, so personally, I haven't played any of those instruments, but definitely love all that sort of stuff and open to anything really that is, as I said earlier, that is part of the musical spectrum, really. As for your, what was your, sorry, second part of the question again?
I'm not sure. I was just saying that I
Oh,
thought
that's
it,
right. The
yeah,
musicians
yes.
being grateful. Yes. Look, I believe that any artist, the reason why they can do what they can do is because of the fans and because of people that support them, like yourself. I mean, you all went and bought my book. You all love my book, and that's why write the book for, and also play music, is because you want to connect with another human being. You want to share stories. Music, you're sharing it in a sonic manner, like you create music and it touches people. A book is sharing stories, and I've always loved books when I was a small child. So so I'm glad you got a lot of that sort of stuff out of it. And I think it's always important that the artist gives themselves to their fans, always open to, to them if they've got any questions, because at the end of the day, if it wasn't for you people, we wouldn't be here. So, and I think it's important to be grateful for that, because, as your trajectory keeps going up and you're gaining more fans, it's so important that you appreciate that, because it's very much important of what you do.
Thank you.
And our own rock star panelist from originally from Colorado, the lovely Donette Thayer, also
Very
known as a
kind.
member of Game Theory, Hex, and a solo artist in her own right. Welcome, Donette.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for setting this up. So
Nice to meet you
yeah,
too, Donette.
it's nice to meet you, Joe. Thanks for doing this.
No problem.
Yes, I thought it was really interesting. I I have done a lot of interviews. I've been on the other side of the microphone, I guess, and done a bunch of interviews, some better than others, and I really wanted to get a perspective on how it would feel to be on your side, Joe, doing the interview, and see how it works, and you certainly did do that in your book. You provided a lot of insight on how it's different to approach one person from one person to another, and I really liked how you tailored your approaches to fit the person that you were dealing with.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you picked up on that. I always yeah, I think being a musician, it's like you said, what it's like to be on the other side. I've got this perspective where I'm behind the scenes as well as in front of the scene. So, and when I'm interviewing artists, because I've got the same sort of mindset, from coming from a musician, I understand them. So rather than any normal sort of music journalist or writer who's just much more the observer and they interview them, they really can't sort of get to the mindset or understand where they're coming from unless you actually do it yourself. I mean, so I think there's that edge that I have in regards to having that ability, and also, as I said earlier, being a music fan, I'm interested in music. I'm interested in how an artist's mind works, how they go about creating, and what it is about them. I'm not interested in the sex, drugs, rock and roll, because at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff, as I've learned over the years, it's all myth making, and rock and roll is about myth making, and seriously, if you look at any artist who has been around for decades, they have got their. Am I allowed to swear on this, by the way?
Sure.
They've got the shit together, you know. They're not doing, because usually if you do drugs or alcohol, at some point it's gonna implode. It's gonna affect you. And a lot of artists, sadly, you know, have gone, you know, in the height of their career, or you know, the band's sort of split up. So it's important to know that there's a lot more involved than just, you know, what the perception of the audience is. So yeah, so having that mindset and knowing, I go in that and it's almost like talking to a friend in a pub, you know, having a beer and say, hey, let's share stories and just sort of having a chat. And that's what I wanted to get in my book, which obviously that comes across in what you're saying. So I'm happy to hear that.
Okay, great. So let's start with some of the questions that we prepared for the book. One of the many stories that you shared in your book was a chapter called Legends, and you talked about meeting Hank Marvin of the Shadows. So I'm thinking that maybe in the United States, we're not as familiar with Hank Marvin. You described him as Britain's most influential guitar player, which I thought was interesting. You mentioned that at the age of 15, you learned a lot about playing guitar just from listening to the Shadows album, Golden Greats. And when you met Hank Marvin, you just really loved his personality. He was kind. He gave you a lot of extra time. And he relayed his tales to you of recording at Abbey Road Studio. He was also the first guitarist in England to play the Fender Stratocaster guitar. So I'm curious, what was it about Hank's playing that made him just so influential? And why do you think he appealed to you so much? And then on a more personal side, I love the Paul McCartney Coming Up video. So it is rumored that one of the characters that Paul plays, which I always thought was Buddy Holly, is Hank Marvin of the Shadows. So I'm curious what you think. Is it him? Has he ever spoken about it? Has he ever admitted that that is him? Or what is the story behind that?
Behind that, well, I've always thought it was Buddy Holly too, but I know I've heard stories that is actually Hank Marvin, but I never got a chance to actually ask Hank that. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's one of those sort of mysteries that sometimes it's pretty cool because you're trying to figure out, is it really? Maybe Paul McCartney may say it one day, you know, I don't know. But yes, that video is quite and I think because of the Beatles time, and Shadows were just before the Beatles. I mean, they were the biggest band in England before the Beatles. So maybe, you know, it might be Paul McCartney's sort of nod to Hank Marvin. But again, the Beatles were influenced by a lot of American 50s music, you know, Elvis Presley, you know, Buddy Holly. So it could be even Buddy Holly. So I don't know in that sense. As for the Shadows, now in America, your equivalent to the Shadows is the Ventures. I mean, so the Ventures were the biggest instrumental band in America in the early 60s. So the Shadows sort of predate that, late 50s. They were originally Cliff Richard's backing band. And Hank Marvin is the most influential guitar player for every single guitar player that came out of Britain around about that period. Everybody from Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, to Richie Blackmore, Mark Knopfler, anybody from that generation were influenced by Hank. So, and you know, I was influenced by him because I always loved, growing up, I used to love that sort of early 60s sort of surfy instrumental music. And when I picked up the guitar, I just thought it was just a great music to sort of learn, because, you know, it's easy to sort of learn the melody and then sit down and learn the rhythm parts to it. And it really helped me a lot with my playing, really helped me understand melody, helped me understand how a song is constructed. And yeah, so it was great when I finally got to meet him. He was absolutely a gentleman. I mean, he actually lives in Australia. He's been living here for about 40 years now. He lives on the other side of the country in Perth. So, but it was just wonderful to finally meet him. He was a decent man. He told me a lot of stories about, you know, the Shadows, working with Cliff Richard, and, you know, like just being able to sort of talk to a guitar hero. I suppose it's a bit being starstruck in some ways, but it was great. He made you feel comfortable. When I told him, as I mentioned in the book, about the 20 Golden Greats, he mentioned how that album was also being used by a lot of other people, you know, guitar teachers. So yeah, it's really wonderful, and it was just a pleasure. I mean, it's one of my highlights, really.
Oh, that's wonderful. Karen, do you have a question?
I do. Okay, so you obviously have interviewed so many people. Well, how much research and prep do you do before an interview? And do you have any special routines, any special little, you know, rituals that you try to do beforehand? And then also in any of these interviews, Has anything crazy ever happened that has just blown you away and maybe thrown the interview off track or stopped the interview? Have you been able to have any of those crazy experiences?
Um, that's a good question. There's been a couple of times where I've been told by publicists do not ask certain questions because they might be too controversial. So you sort of get, you go, okay, but it's also in the way you ask something and how the artist feels with you. I mean, there's been times when, for example, Slash from Guns N' Roses, when I was talking to him once, I did a phone interview with him, and we got 20 minutes together, and at the 19-minute mark, the publicist came online and said, okay guys, sorry, but it's time to wrap up the interview, we've got another journalist. And I never forget this. Slash turned around and he goes, no, we'll finish the interview when I'm ready. I'm enjoying this chat with Joe, so we'll keep on talking. And that was it. So we chatted for another like 20 minutes. It was about a 40-minute interview in the end. And Slash opened up to me. He told me stuff that I would never reveal. It's on tape, but I would never reveal. It's because it's all about the music, and I think that's another thing that's important with interviewing is developing a rapport with the artist and knowing that they can trust you, knowing that whatever they tell you, if it's something in confidence, you're not going to go off and write a headline, and just sell newspapers or magazines. So I think that's very important. And that comes from being also a musician, knowing that, what it's like to be on the other side. What was, sorry, just go back to the first part of your question. What was it again? Refresh my memory.
If you have any special rituals when you're doing your research, how much time do you take researching the artist before?
Okay, so researching, I spend days and days because it's important to ask questions that they haven't been asked before. So in order to do that, you got to try and read as much as you can. Obviously, a lot of artists, I will know their history already, but I just go and find any old magazine or anything like that, and then just try and work around something, go and put myself in the fan and go, what would a fan like to know? Like, would they like to know this about this certain person? And that's where I come from, So, and making sure that what I ask them is engaging, and usually once you get them a question that they really enjoy and they open up, it can take you to somewhere else. There's been times where I've got a list of questions and half the time I get halfway, we go somewhere else, and I come up with this interview that's even better than what I expected. So, but look, there's never been any sort of times where the interview's been shut down, because, like I said, it's not about the headline; it's about the music. So, so that's my experience with what I've done.
Thank you.
No problem.
Mary?
So I'm really interested in the whole timeline and history of things. My favorite chapter of your book was chapter 7, Make Me Smile, where you talked about how as a child you loved this, artist and the song, and you learned it. And then, I mean, everyone's dream would be to be able to play, like you actually were playing with that. You got to go out for your birthday with your favorite. And I just thought that was amazing. You showed them around Australia. So I was kind of thinking about that, how as children we, can idolize these rock stars. And you had the honor of then working with some and interviewing them. But you also mentioned in another part of your book that today's groups aren't as lasting as the older groups. So although they might have idolized them growing up, I guess they're not really, I'm wondering why you said that, like what's happening with that. And my AI question kind of ties in there. Like, is AI going to start, influencing these younger groups that they're not even really writing their own stuff anymore? So that's kind of where I'm at, is the whole history and timeline.
I think, look, the period in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s were very a period in music history where everything was being really creative. I mean, anything you do nowadays, really, it's been done before, but it's how you put your own take. That's what originality is. I mean, you're not going to reinvent the wheel. It's already been done, right? So it's about, and if you notice a lot of younger bands are coming through, they're sort of name checking and influences are from these bands from the 60s and 70s, which is quite, interesting because some of these bands, I mean, like, for example, if you put yourself back into, I usually sometimes go back, say, 50 years to say when in 1975, which is what, 50 years or something, yeah. at that time, if we were like now, as we're talking now, talking about 50 bands in the 50 years ago, we're talking about bands like Kiss, Led Zeppelin, the Eagles. But back then, you would look back in history, and it's the 1920s. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, it's like, and you will think, no, that's grandpa's music, you know. But yeah, nowadays it's not grandpa's music. It's actually bands are really cool, like, oh yeah, Led Zeppelin, you know. So it's lasted the distance, and I think it'll still, you know, in 50 years' time they'll be still talking about these bands. But as for bands today, I think it's just my personal opinion. I mean, there's some great bands out there, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're going to have the distance, because they a lot of times back then, if you look at the histories of a lot of these bands and artists, they would spend years developing their craft, playing gigs, playing everything. I mean, the Beatles did like 4 years of gigs before anyone got to hear, before they became famous. You know, I mean, they must have done about 1,000 gigs. Nowadays, a lot of bands will do 1 or 2 gigs, get signed to a record label, and it's like it doesn't work that way. That's why then when the pressures start to hit, it all comes, you know, falls apart, because they haven't developed that craft, and it takes a long time. It takes years. I mean, excuse me, back in the day, a record label would know that it takes time for an artist to develop. So by the time they got to the third, fourth album, they will go, now it's probably the time they're going to break through. Nowadays, you sign a deal, you do one song. If that song doesn't make it the top 10, you're out. Next one comes in.
Mm.
So anything that lasts has to have, you know, that distance behind it. As for AI, early days, I'm not interested in working with AI, because I'm old school. I like to do things as we, you know, used, and as I still do. It's about the human element. It's about working it through. It's about imperfection. There's too much perfection in music today, and I think it's lost its soul. I mean, everything's auto-tuned. I mean, for example, I mean, I'm sure American Idol, you got there, The Voice, all those people who go on those shows, you know, and then later on you hear the music on the radio. It's all auto-tuned. I mean, what happened to being just a normal person that comes, you know, and has talent? Can you imagine Bob Dylan going on a show like American Idol? He won't even get past the audition, because
That's right.
basically his
That's
voice, yeah, his voice would not make the cut, because they think there's a certain way to sing, which I think is a shame, because there's a lot of talented young people out there, and who should be actually getting the chance to sort of have their music out there, but they're not, because they're being overlooked for these other ones who are, you know, doing things perfect, using auto tune. I mean, yeah, that's, and I think AI will even make that probably worse. Who knows?
worse.
I mean, this technology is good, you know. I mean, we're lucky, like we can do this today, you know, do the Zoom thing, but there's a downside to technology, you know, also. So we've got to have that balance between it. So it'll be interesting to see where the AI thing does go in the next year or so.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, and you know, on one hand. So you
Yeah,
hit the nail on
yeah.
the head. Thank you.
Donette, the lovely Donette.
Yeah, I would really love to ask you how much influence you think technology has had, but it's not one of the questions we submitted, so I don't know if
That's
you
okay. Technology has made a big difference, especially post-pandemic, really. I mean, a lot of my interviews now are done by Zoom, rather than, and you know, that's also saves the record labels, as you would know yourself, going to, you know, fly off and to another country, do promo for 2 weeks and go into another country. That costs money. So this way they just hook up a artist with the journalist and they can do the interview. So I think technology is great. I mean, you know, I've got my own home studio, so I record all my stuff in my studio, which means I don't need to pay a studio to, for, you know, I can take as long as I want to make an album. Can you imagine? I mean, you know, as you know, the story of Def Leppard, I mean, it took 4 years to make that album, and $5 million, to, in the end, it cost them. They had to sort of recoup in order to break even. So, you know, a lot of that studio time, you know, now you can just sort of sit in studio, take 2 years, doesn't cost you a cent. It's all your time. So technology has been wonderful, but at the same time, it's again what I said earlier. It's what you do with it and how you use it, you know. And if you start taking over where computers just do the work for you, I think it's no longer music. I think it's computerized music. Really, it's no longer the human element, because it is. It's about another human being. You want to connect to how they are, all their nuances, all their imperfections, and I think that's really important. So yeah, technology has been great, and I think it's opened up a lot of doors. And even journalism, you know, like back in the day, you would type up your piece and you had to post it out, you know, and make sure it got there. You know, nowadays you just type it up, email it through on your deadline. Don't need to do anything else,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it reminded me when you were talking about the difference between the 1950s and the I guess, hundreds, and then the 1950s and the 2000s is just a vast jump. And a lot of that had to do with technological developments in instrumentation and recording. So
Yes. Mm.
I don't know how much, like electric guitars, for example, that was a
Mm.
huge step forward, made a lot of
Absolutely.
difference in music. So I don't know what the how would you quantify that change in terms of
I think that it's just this normal evolution of technology and instrument. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, once electric guitar was invented, that changed. I mean, we find loud rock music. You know, before that it was mostly jazz sort of stuff. You know, I mean, you know, like you know, with Elvis, for example. Once Elvis came out, you know, the whole thing just blew open. You know, the rock and roll gate. So then you have, you know, the later on the '60s. I mean, the Beatles really did. I think the Beatles have to be credited in regards to how they use technology. That opened up so many doors. I mean,
right.
before the Beatles, it was so different in a recording studio, and obviously now even more. Like as I said to you, go back 20 years now since auto tune, how it's affected music. Now with AI, I think, you know, in 20 years time we'll look back and we go, wow, it's going to be a totally different music world, really. So it's always going to develop something. Somebody's going to come up with a new idea, take it somewhere else. So it's just a normal trajectory, really. So it is interesting. It really is.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to piggyback on that AI question. When you look at like the Beatles and how they AI'd that song, I'm just trying to think what it's called now. That
Oh,
they can
right.
and yeah, so they can
Another
put,
one.
you know, John back in the song, they can isolate. So on one hand, we're all like, wow, that's amazing. We're so excited. But then it kind of does lose that human element. Like now you're just making up music, throwing voices in it. And so the magic of the four of them being there, you know, is kind of gone. So, you know, it is kind of a catch-22, I
It
think.
is. It is. It is. I agree with you. I mean, look, that Beatles song is great, and it's great to sort of hear them all together. But again, it's all got to do. The thing about bands and music, it's chemistry, right? And I mean, as you know yourself, Donette, by being in bands, you know, it's the interaction between the musicians and what happens out of that, you know. And chemistry is a large thing. And if you're just going to do it from by
Sorry.
AI, where's the chemistry in AI? It's just it's all machines, really. I mean, and I'm not talking about machines like craft work because that's still humans playing it, you know. I mean, total machines where now AI is programmed, and yeah, it is. It's really, really, you know, it's a catch-22. I agree with you.
Yeah. So to go back to a question about your book, you have a chapter that was entitled "Do What Thou Will," which was really talking about your meetings with musician Jeff Martin, who was the front man for a band called the Tea Party, and he was very devoted to British occultist Aleister Crowley and his esoteric teachings. And so when you talked about this in your book, you talked about the fact that many musicians over the years have kind of famously been devoted to the teachings of Crowley, such as the Beatles, David Bowie, Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page. And yeah, Jimmy Page famously purchased that house that belonged to Crowley. I think it was in Scotland. And you were on assignment from Rolling Stone to do the story with Jeff Martin when you first met with him. And you discussed talking about his esoteric philosophies. And he talked to you a lot about his ideas about Crowley. And then you met up with him years later. And at which point you said, like, he had just really drastically changed professionally and physically. He had split with his band. He stopped drinking. He gave up drugs. He traveled with less of an entourage. He just had less interest in kind of the way his life was. And he had a much narrower, straighter path in life. So I just thought I would ask your opinion of Crowley's influence maybe on this particular musician. Do you think that he had a positive or a negative effect on him? And did it affect his music, or was it more of his personal life? And you also mentioned that Jeff Martin recommended you buy that Crowley book and read it. And I was curious if you ever did and how you would have incorporated his teachings into your life as well.
Yeah, okay. Now, first of all, the occult thing, I've always sort of been interested in the occult and spiritual matters. Oh, look, occult's got this sort of weird sort of in comma, like it's it's all this really weird stuff, but it's not. It's just I mean, I've always been open to different philosophies in life, and music, as you know yourself, Donette, is a very spiritual thing. I mean, I think it's one of the highest arts. I think music, because I've seen the power of music. It can make you cry. It can make you happy. It can do all sorts of stuff. So there is some sort of, element that it's spiritual, and some sort of element that is beyond our understanding. So, I've studied many sorts of different ways of looking at things. And, yes, I did get that book, 777 and other, was it Probabilistic Writings? But, look, Crowley is a really interesting fellow. He's got a reputation for being the world's wickedest man on the planet, but a lot of that stuff is, again, it's all hyped up, and yeah, it depends on what you do with what he wrote about. So Jeff he's dedicated, and he's a very serious man who's dedicated to those teachings, and in a good way, in a positive way. So I think it does affect the way he plays his music, and in a positive manner. So I can't really comment on anything else because I don't really know him personally in that sense. Because when you meet an artist, you only get that sort of time, and you don't really know somebody unless you spend time outside of that media period. Because a lot of time, what people don't understand about artists is they're on like it's work. They've been media trained. They know how to talk to you, so they're not going to open up to you in certain manners unless you get to know them sort of in a better way. So but as for Crowley, he's just an interesting fellow. The Beatles name checked him. A lot of artists do sort of. It's just a normal, I think, way of evolution in your own playing. You sort of interest in stuff, and your music changes. So as your music changes and your tastes sort of change, you start to think of things differently, and then you go, and then you might come across a book or something, and you go, oh, this is interesting. It might inspire you for new ideas. So. And that's what it did for me. It just inspired me gave me different ways of looking at things and where it coming from.
Great, thank you. Karen?
So throughout your career, you have interviewed countless artists and bands. Have there been many instances where you during the interview or even after the interview you dismissed them and you thought, oh, they're not going anywhere, and then after a bit of time you end up liking the music?
That's a very good question. No, because usually as I mentioned in my book about Nickelback, when I they were, like I said, just starting to get known in Australia. They weren't big yet, and no one had interviewed them beforehand, obviously, because they were new. So I was the one who got the first interview, and I went to my editor and I said to him, "You need to put them on the cover. They're going to be massive." And he just said to me, "No, they're not. They'll disappear in a couple of weeks' time." And I go, "No, they won't. You're going to be sorry about this." And what happened? Became huge, So later on, he did apologise to me, and he regretted not putting them on the cover, but it was a bit too late. So, no, look, most times when I see, I don't do new bands anymore. I'm specifically now do bands that are established and from a certain period, because that's what I enjoy. But back then, I used to do a lot of new bands, a lot of new acts that will come through, and most of them I could tell which ones would last a distance and which ones wouldn't. Some of them, were around for another year or so and they disappeared, and I could tell that. Some of them I knew would be around for a long time. They're still around, so it's sort of hard to gauge, but you get a feeling. It really is, and when you talk to them, I suppose a lot of young bands, the few that I spoke to who saw it as a way of becoming famous, I could tell straight away that they'll be gone. They won't be, still around in a year's time. And yeah, because if you're doing music to become famous, as I say to people, choose a different profession, because it's not supposed to be about fame and fortune. It's about the art. It's about making music, connecting with a human being. If you want to make money, I say to people, if you get into music to make money, I suggest you become a music lawyer. There you go.
Yeah.
Because
Mary's our
making money
resident. Mary's our resident lawyer here on the
Yes.
call. So.
There you go. Is that
Yeah,
true,
I just-
Mary?
I'm a lawyer, but I'm a friendly one, and I help a lot of elderly people. I would love to be a music lawyer, but no, I don't know.
But yeah, that's the honest thing. I mean, if you do music in order to make money, I think you're in a wrong profession. So that's why I do music, I do journalism, I do write book, because you gotta diversify. You gotta be able to have your income coming from all sorts of different places. And even now with streaming, that's killed industry. Absolutely. I mean, you don't make hardly any money now from music, because people are just listening to music for free, unless you tour and sell CDs, same as books. I mean, you bought a book, so you actually support me by buying my book, which gives me income, and obviously, goes to the publisher too, but it makes income for me. But a lot of people will just sort of with music, and it's 99 cents to download a track, and yet people won't download. I've had people say to me, why should I download a track when I can listen to it for free? And I go, but you realize 99 cents, you buy that track, not only are you supporting the artist, but that track is yours, then you can listen to it any time. And they go, yeah, but so can I on streaming. How can you answer that argument? You can't. You don't win that argument, because basically they don't understand, that how important that 99 cents is to an art. I mean, if you've got 2,000 people on your Facebook, right, and each of those people spent 99 cents, that would mean so much to an artist. Absolutely. That would be like, wow, it's like almost selling like I don't know, thousands of albums back in the day. It would be so much. So, it's just so small to ask for, but yet that's the way people's mentality has changed, and because of the way digital world is.
Joe, who's on your playlist right now? Who would anybody surprise us that you?
No, at the moment I'm listening to, because I'm writing a story on a few stories actually on Blondie. I've been listening to my old Blondie albums again. So and I saw Ville Valo a week ago, who's a Finnish goth rocker. I'm a big fan of his, so I've got his music on. Whatever I'm working on, I like listening to the music, because it helps me with get more into their sort of mindset. So if I was interviewing, say, Pink, I would be listening to her album, day in, day out, because try and get inside that mindset. So whatever I'm working on is what I listen to, really.
Yeah, it's awesome. Mary?
I was just thinking what you said. I looked up your Make Me Smile when I told you I liked that chapter the best. I had never heard that song, and that whole flamenco style guitar really did pull me in. So you're talking about, like researching to interview with you. I wanted to listen to more of your music, and I just really enjoyed hearing about that style that you loved and that you got to play. But I also was interested in how you said that the more introverted the person was, or no, the more extroverted they were on stage, the shyer they were, the more shy they were off stage. And I found that really interesting. Does that happen to you? Like, do you find you become a almost different personality on stage then? And I just was interested to hear your thoughts on
No,
that.
that's good. That's a very good question. Absolutely. 99.9% of music artists or people on stage are basically shy. I mean, introverted people, because look, when you get on stage, it's like theatre. You become this different person. You're on stage, you're performing, right? When you get off stage, you go back to who you are. I mean, you wouldn't think so from people see me on stage or how I am talking to you, but I feel very uncomfortable in social situation, because it's not my scene. My scene is much more music. You put me on the stage in front of 30,000 people, for example, I love it, right? I can perform. But you put me in front of, say, 10 people in a small room and get me to talk, it's a different thing. You go, start getting shy, and it is different. So nearly every artist I've met are in the same boat. I'm sure you can relate to that, Donette, can't you?
and I definitely can relate to that. But I don't know. I was always a side man. I was never really a front man as much in
Oh,
most
okay.
of my main
Okay.
career. So I was
Yeah.
not all that extroverted on stage either. So
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough. But yeah, look, it is a very interesting perspective because yeah, a lot of people think, you know, you just extroverted all the time and stuff. And I think if you also, when you get up on stage and you play this person, which is still you, don't get me wrong, you're not trying to be somebody else, you're being you, but you're being who you truly are, as in what you want to show the audience. And then when you get off, you sort of turn that off and you become the normal day-to-day, you know, person. It's when you get off on stage and still think you're this star or whatever you want to call it, that's where the problems begin. You know, that's where like the ego start coming in, because really you're just like everybody else. I'm just like you. Everybody's the same. The only difference is I do one type of work, you do a different type of work. And when you're on stage, that's your time on, you know, in the spotlight. When you get off stage, it's no longer yours, it's someone else's. So and that's really important. And I think if you look at a lot of, again, biographies of famous people who've had periods where it's gone really wrong, it's because when they've lost their sense of who they are, their self, and they've got mixed up with being, this is who I am 24/7, and you can't be. It's impossible, you know. As Neil Young sings, was it you better to, was it burn out then fade away, you know. I don't want to burn out. I want to be able to sort of stay around and be as around as long as I can, making music that is still, you know, viable for people to listen to.
Donette?
yeah, I was struck by how many heavy metal bands you interviewed the guitarists for, and I thought it was interesting when you pointed out that there's a sort of a camaraderie among heavy metal musicians, and that the whole, you know, death metal kind of ethos is really does not continue to continue along the same trajectory as the dichotomy of stage versus life. That was true for the heavy metal people because they were actually quite generous in their uh, regular life and really kind-hearted. Uh, I recall you mentioning that, and I wondered, why do you think that is? Because the two choices that occurred to me were maybe they got it out of their system, this whole aggressive, you know, way of being, or maybe it was because, oh, I don't remember what the other option was, but why do you think?
Look, I think it's like there's two sides to it, and we've all got a dark side, you know, and there's a light. And I think it's important to sort of have that pent up. If, you know, like people, you know, if you got anger or something, it's important to release it so you can. And once you release it in a healthy way, it's positive. And I think, for example, metal music, they get all their aggression and whatever all out and put on stage, and they form this community. It's like a tribe, which is fantastic. And that's why, and they're just normal, great people, you know. And I worry about things like the more clean cut a band is, the much more I think there's a darker side to them. I mean, you know yourself. You look at any over time, you know, decades of, I suppose, clean cut bands have had this perfect image, and then you hear all these scandals going. What's going on, you know? And yet, you know, you look in metal history. There's not many scandals in metal history, right? You know, there's these guys. All you hear is like, for example, Iron Maiden. They go off and play golf and just go and fish. You know, I mean, these are metal guys. You think, what? They should be like, ugh. But because they get all that aggression and that energy out on stage, and they feel, and afterwards you feel good. It's like playing sport. Sport's important for your mental health and your being, and that's how I see music. It's like sport. It's like you get out there, you get all your energy, you connect with another human, with the whole crowd, and then afterwards you feel exhausted, but you feel good. You go, oh, I feel so much good. So yeah, I think, and I think the metal scene is really, really important in that. I think they're a great example of that, you know, rather than, you know, picture perfect, whatever, you know, because that's true. You go through any sort of musical history, you'll see that no scandals of a metal band.
Interesting. Well, and if they did have scandals, it would be like, oh, well, what do you expect, you know?
That's right. Yes, like that's correct. What do you
Yeah.
expect? Well, we're metal guys. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's been a couple, but nothing like in the picture perfect world of say pop stars, I suppose, if you want to call that.
Or Bill Cosby, for example. I mean,
That's absolutely. There you
Yeah.
go.
he
Absolutely.
was the super dad, and then
Yeah.
we
Mm.
learn later, well, maybe it wasn't all sweetness and
Yeah.
light.
So Joe, in your book, you talked about the band Queen.
Mhm.
At least twice you interviewed Brian May in 2003 when he was preparing to do the We Will Rock You musical. And then he invited you in 2014 with your wife to go to see the Queen and Adam Lambert show in Australia. And you told the story in there, which I had to research. I thought it was so interesting about how Brian May famously built his own guitar as a teenager. He was 16. He referred to the guitar as a Red Special. I think you even said it was made out of like firewood. It was like kind of
That's
like
right.
crappy. They made their
Mhm.
own guitar. I'm guessing because he maybe didn't have money for a guitar. And this guitar was intentionally designed to give feedback. And he created it after he saw Jeff Beck playing live. So I had a couple questions. One is, if you were ever going to build your own guitar, what would be the defining features for the Joe Matera guitar?
Mhm.
And then secondly, when you went to see the Queen and Adam Lambert show, how did you feel seeing those amazing, iconic songs that Freddie Mercury sang, seeing them sung by someone else? Was that
Okay.
kind of, how did that make you feel?
Okay. First question. I had a signature Haywire Joe Matera guitar. It was made by an American luthier, Haywire guitars in Florida. I had it for about 10 years. If you see some of my old photos of a black Strat, that's the guitar. It's got my name on it. I sold that a few years ago to a fan. He had no idea I was the guy selling it, and he bought it, and he still got it. And he said it's one of his favorite guitars, and he's looked after it ever since. But I just sold it because I had too many guitars, and I needed to sort of sell off some stuff in order to be able to sort of fund some tours. So but it went in the right hands. It went to a fan, which is really great. So I did have my own guitar, and basically it was based around uh, the look of it was like a David Gilmour guitar, and the sound of it was very much like a Les Paul. It had humbuckers in it, and it's basically called a fat Strat sort of thing. So, but yeah, look, I had that. As for Queen, I reckon Adam Lambert is absolutely perfect. I think, and the thing about Adam Lambert is he's not trying to be Freddie Mercury. He's just been him, and it suits. That's why they call themselves Queen with Adam Lambert. I think he did a great job. He brought a freshness to the music, and very respectful Freddie Mercury. There's no way you think he's trying to, take over his place or whatever. He's just really great. So it was fantastic. I think it was one of the best shows I saw that year, actually. Absolutely great.
Wonderful. And I just have a follow-up question because you just recently announced that you are part of a tribute album to Queen and Freddie Mercury, and you did a cover of the song Delilah from their album Innuendo. And I was just curious why you picked that particular song. What is it that appealed to you about
Okay,
that?
well, most people would pick the most obvious songs, right? And I wanted to pick something different. I thought, well, if you're going to do a cover, I'm not going to do Bohemian Rhapsody, that's for sure. That's been done a million times. I thought I'd choose something different. And because I love cats and I knew Freddie loved cats, so I chose Delilah. And I just brought my own stamp to it, and it came out really well. Absolutely fantastic. I'm really pleased with it. And even the brief was to sort of do a cover of it, but not copy it, carbon copy, just bring my own touch to it. So it had to be done in my own style, and it is. It's got my own guitar solo, which sort of brings up the spirit of Brian May without copying Brian May's actual solo. So yeah, that's why I chose it. It's just something that was different, and I thought it's good for people to sort of hear it and hopefully discover the original version and check it out.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Thank you. Karen?
Quick question. You
Yep.
are on a deserted island and you
Yep.
can only bring a few albums with you. Which ones are
Which ones are what? Sorry.
coming along in your suitcase to that island? Which album?
Oh,
you-
how many albums can I pick?
5.
5. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Reckless by Bryan Adams. City of the City by Jerry Rafferty. Signs of Life by Billy Squire. And 20 Golden Greats by the Shadows.
Wow, great choices.
Mary?
If you could work with any other guitar player, living or dead, on a collaboration, who might it be? And it kind of ties in with how I liked your chapter 7, where you got to play
Okay.
with your favorite. It all
David
same
Gilmour
here
from
for
Pink
me.
Floyd. Yeah, David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. I think he's a great guitar player. I love his style of music. And like I said earlier, my guitar was sort of modelled on his type of guitar, but I just think he's a great player. And it'd be great to sort of. He's one guy I haven't interviewed. I love to interview him, and maybe someday I will. But yeah, he's one guy I would love to sort of do something.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
Donette?
Oh, okay. I really enjoyed your chapters about Rick Wakeman because he just seemed like such a charming guy. And I wonder how much of the kind of charisma that he seemed to have, how much does that play into becoming a success in the music industry, do you think? You've
I think it's
interviewed a lot of
huge success.
successful people, and
Yeah.
it seems like the charisma would be a big ingredient.
Oh, absolutely. Charisma is very much part. I mean, look, charisma, image, that all comes into it. It's a package. The thing about music is, yes, music is, first and foremost the first thing that is important, and being able to have a talent for it. But the other thing is, image plays a big part of it, as well as charisma. I mean, you got to be able to sort of get along, and be able to communicate, I mean, no one likes an egocentric rock star. I mean, it just turns you off. Everyone's a fan. So, and Rick is just fantastic. He's just so down to earth. I mean, he makes you laugh, and I think being in a band like Yes, who are all serious at what they do, because it's prog rock, I suppose. They've got a reputation for being serious. He brings a lightness to it, and I think that really makes it much more appealing to a wider audience, which I think is great. So, and you could talk to him for hours. I mean, the stories he could tell me. I mean, I don't know if you've got in the States. Have you got a show called Grumpy Old Men?
Oh, yes.
You had a movie.
The
Yeah.
movie.
Oh, you got the movie, yeah. Well, this is a series where people like Rick Wakeman comment on contemporary matters. It's really funny, their views on life, and you should check it out because it is. So yeah, definitely plays a big part. Charisma.
Thank you.
So we just had like a little quick fire round because we just want to know more about your musical preferences. So I'm going to
Absolutely.
say this or that, and you just off
Yep.
the top of your head, whatever you feel. Lennon or McCartney?
Lennon,
Jagger or Richards?
Richards,
Elton John or Billy Joel?
Elton John,
Marvin Gaye or Stevie Wonder?
Stevie Wonder,
Bob Dylan or Paul Simon?
Bob Dylan,
Joni Mitchell or Carole King?
Carole King,
Van Morrison or Neil Young?
definitely Neil Young,
Sgt. Pepper or the White Album?
Sergeant Pepper. I'm not from the generation of the Beatles in such sense, but I love Sergeant Pepper. I think that's a great album.
Sticky Fingers or Exile on Main Street?
Exile Main Street.
And Foreigner or REO Speedwagon?
Well, that's really hard because I love both bands. I've got all their albums, but I'll go Foreigner purely because I named my band after Foreigner's Double Vision album.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and I've met Mick Jones and interviewed him quite a few times. So definitely Foreigner.
Are you voting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
No, I'm not. I wish it was, but no.
Because
yes,
Foreigner's up for it right now. So
yes, and
Yeah.
I definitely get my vote on that one. That's just they deserve to be Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else have any questions?
I think he covered everything.
Have I covered everything? Oh, that's good.
Gave us a lot of time, Joe.
Yes. This has
Oh,
been
that's good.
wonderful.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad I've covered everything. yeah, I thought there'd be more questions, but that's good. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. So yeah, it's all yeah, I really appreciate the interest, and hopefully you've taken something from what I've said today, and it's answered your questions for you. Give you a bit more insight. And yeah, look, thank you again for buying my book. I'm really happy. So I'll tell you something now. So I don't want you putting this on the video though.
Oh, okay. Do you want
Okay,
me to
'cause
do you
it's-
want me to stop the recording for you?
Yeah. Unless there's something else you want to ask before you stop, it's up to you.
No, I guess I'll just do a close. I'll just say thank you so much for joining us today. We've just enjoyed learning more about you. You've just been very charming, and it's been a lot of fun. And we look forward to maybe talking to you in the future again. Thank you.
Yes,
So
thank
Thank
you
you for
so
having me on
much.
your show.
I'm gonna cut through.
No worries. Thank